Good morning, friends. Today, hello Sushmita. Today, we'll be dealing with the elective in 5th semester psychology, that is educational psychology. I'll be trying to deal with block 1 today, or as per the syllabus given to you. And that will be dealing with the aims of education with relation to individual and society, and also what are the general psychological principles behind the aims of education, and with a separate chapter on understanding the learner's scope, that is education, scope of education and problems of schooling in contemporary India. With regard to the educational psychology, if you try to understand, first we have to understand the concept of education and what we are trying to achieve through education. We know that we live in a society, and educational system is a miniature of such society. Education actually tries to make an individual adapt to society and live as per the norms of the society with conformity with society principles. Now, for an individual to be able to adjust in society, the learning should be such that he is given abilities or capacities to develop within the society. So the educational system can be called as a miniature of society because it helps him to live in society according to the society principles and makes him adjust his life to that of the societal anticipations. So we find that the individual has to be modified, and his behavioral modification is dependent on his environmental interaction. So during schooling, what we are trying to do, we are trying to make the individual learn about society, learn about knowledge, and make himself understand about all the aspects of society and make him adjust to society, make a living, make a career, and also understand about his own self and also about the knowledge aspect in the society existing. So if you try to see what is education, education comes from the Latin word educare. So we have educere, educatum, educo, all these are coming from the Latin. All these roots help you to understand. For example, the educare means to raise or to nourish a person or to bring up someone. And educere means to draw out, that is to bring out or to lead out. And educatum means to train or to teach. So educare means to actually bring out something, the potential inner side that we try to bring out. So here we are trying to draw out or lead out the inner capacities or potentialities of the individual, and that is the purpose of the education. Therefore, we have the educationist Mackenzie saying that if we try to consciously direct some effort for an individual and try to bring the best in him, that is known as education. We are trying to develop the powers in the individual. There is another educationist called as James Driver. He says that it is a lifelong process. The education continues throughout one's life, and if a child is exposed to experiences inside the home and outside the home, as well as to different activities, then all those activities may comprise that individual to actually develop his potentialities. Therefore, what are the different activities that the child tries to undergo? He may be undergoing certain experiences in school, at home, with his friends, in his family environment, or in a religious community activities, or He may be involved in the library, in the museum, in a playground, in a school, and all the experiences which actually try to build up his knowledge or his experiences, which actually give him a sort of liberating or development effect, that is known as education, according to Trevor. So education is more than teaching or instruction. It goes beyond that, because an individual consciously takes part in the learning experiences. He gains something out of it. Now, we know that Gandhi, or national leader, Mahatma Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, he also had some views on education, which he tried to develop in his children actually, and also to the whose principles have been applied in educational system in a number of schools. He says, he talks about the all-round development of the child. That is, a child should be developed physically, mentally, emotionally, and also spiritually. We have John Dewey, another educational philosopher. He says, the development of all the capacities in an individual will enable him to control his environment, because man is always in contact with his environment, in interaction with his environment. So when the person is able to deal with an environment, or able to control his environment and fulfill all his possibilities, that is, the potentialities which make him have certain outer influences, and that influences, that is, he's trying to do something in the society or in the environment, and he's able to successfully do it. That is the possibility he talks about. So here he talks about the development of the capacities, and also interacting with the environment and fulfilling all the possibilities or the chances which he has as an individual. That is, he is able to interact with the environment and get his things done, and that is known as education. So how will a person knows a thing, learns a thing, at the same time interacts with the environment, and also tries to make the best use of the possibilities or the chances he has with his environment, that is known as education. Now, when we consider the education aspect in India, we have a different view about education. That is, the traditional view talks about siksha. Siksha means actually to discipline. If one person, the word from the word Sanskrit word root, siksh, it comes shis. We have got the siksha. That is, we talk about disciplining one's own mind. Also, we talk about instructing and also teaching and controlling. Now here, our Indian system talks about adhyayana, that is trying to learn something, and vinaya, where one tries to be humble, and also prabodha. Prabodha means to teach or to wake up one's consciousness. So awakening of the spirit, one would call. Now all these words now correspond to the modern education. In education too, we talk about discipline, arousal of the mind, and also trying to wake up one's mind, and also having attention. All these aspects, that is adhyayana, siksha, vinaya, prabodha, are seen nowadays. But then one aspect of the Indian education is they try to also focus on the spiritual education of the child, because they believe that even spiritual education should be taught to the students. Now, when we come to the West, they think that the education is a lifelong process. Now, starting from right from the time the child is born, from his childhood to the end until he dies, because every day a person learns something. So we talk about the generally aspect of the growth. So according to Rush, he says education is enhancement of personality and embodiment of universal values. Whatever they see, if they try to develop in their individuality, and also try to develop what we call development and their own personality is developed, that is known as education. So here we talk about the general gradual growth of mind, and also they talk about the physical fitness and body culture, etc. So according to the educational thinkers, physical, intellectual, aesthetic, moral, and spiritual potentialities can be developed by education. Now, what are the general aims of education? What are aims actually? When we actually do a thing, we expect a particular result. Now, this result is dependent on what we anticipate. So when somebody anticipates or wants something to be done through a particular thing or by doing a particular process, then there is the underlying reason is known as the aim. So a country has aims, an educational system has aims. So the general aims of education are, it is somewhat predetermined or what they want to get something out of it. This implies what sort of processes or activities in education we do so that a particular thing is reached. What we want to reach, what is the ultimate thing that is to be achieved, that is called as aim. When we come to the education, there are certain general aims of education. One of them would be developing the social skills of the child. We know that we are all part of a larger community. It is not that we stay as individuals. Now, whatever skills we need, that also should be amenable, or they should be according to the society in which one lives. So here, we want the individuals to have certain social skills with which they are able to get along with others in the society. Also, the other aim of education would be called as the art of living. It is not that we cannot be just pedantic and try to rely only on the teaching learning aspects of the individual. There are other things like how one actually has the work etiquette, that is how much time they give to the work, how they balance their life and work, and what sort of disciplinary attitudes they have, and also how they learn the lessons, how they interact with others in a cooperative manner, or if they want some information, how they go about getting it in the society, and also all these things, and also working as a part of the others, working with others and working as a part of the team and solving problems, that is being able to coexist with the others, is known as the one of the aims. That is, we should know, a person should know how to live along with others. That is one aspect of the education. So we are talking about the aims of education. One we said was the social skills development, because human beings have to exist with others in the society. They should be good social beings. Otherwise, they would not find fulfillment. And the other I said is learning the art of living, how to achieve things on their own and how to interact with the others and how to live in a graceful way. That also means that they should be able to adapt themselves to others and also be able to interact and also be able to achieve things by actually with their interaction. Suppose they require something, we should be able to talk to other people, solve their problem and go in an amenable manner. This sort of attitude is that education should try to aim to develop in the students. Now also there is another aspect. UNESCO talks about the different aims of learning, and they say one of the aims of learning is helping the students how to learn. If a student knows how to learn, because there are different ways of learning different subjects, he develops the interest and automatically he tries to develop on his own. So one of the primary aims of education is helping people how to learn. So learning to learn is supposed to be one of the aims of the education. Most of the time, the young children are not able to learn on their own because they require certain set of skills which actually help them to master a subject. For example, in science, you require reading the graphs or plotting graphs or trying to analyze a graph, and these are certain skills associated with it. Likewise, in languages, you have got aesthetic appreciation or poetic appreciation, or understanding the connotations, or trying to actually get the information, the historical backgrounds, etc., researching, etc. Now, each thing requires different ways of learning. Now, if a student tries to learn how to learn, it is easy for him to navigate through the course of education. So, one of the aims of the education would be helping students to find the information what they want, so that they will be able to fare even after they leave the school, because they have the ways and means of searching for information, collaborating with people, trying to know what is the problem and trying to get the information as and how they require. Also, we find another aim of the education is to develop a balanced personality. Sometimes we know that self-esteem is required in individuals. One of the aims of the education is to develop self-esteem, to have a reliance or self-confidence, or have a feeling or about one's own self, and be able to deal with situations and people. Sometimes this self-esteem is supposed to lead to boosted egos or sometimes inflated self-egos, but that is not, because they think they are the ultimate persons and they do not live in reality. But that is not the case. The self-ego, inflated self-ego apart, we know that actually self-esteem helps people to get along with a number of situations as well as get along with people. Now, we require a balanced personality, which is neither highly reactive nor at the same time highly humble, but at the same time personality which actually tries to deal with the situation as they are. Now, such a sort of personality would require that the education should try to develop such a quality in the individual where the individual is able to respect himself, have self-esteem, but that does not mean disrespecting others. Such a sort of balanced personality should be developed. That is one of the aims of education. Also, one develops due to education lifelong habits. When we send our children to schools, it is because that the parents feel that the child should learn self-discipline. He should be able to get up in the morning, go to the school regularly, get his homework done, and also take his food regularly, have his bath, and also sleep in time. So all these sort of things, that is disciplining one's own life or having lifelong habits for work. These are the aims of education. That is, they develop some skills which help them to be individuals, and also they try to learn, read, and write, and do certain basic skills and able to get along. Now, these are the basic aims by which the education is taught. Also, we find that the subject matter, either sciences, social sciences, mathematics, these are also taught in schools. So, generally, the aims of education are: 1, developing the social skills; 2, helping the students to gain the art of living; 3, learning how to learn; 4, to develop a balanced personality; and 5, develop lifelong habits for work; and also 6, developing the knowledge of subject matter. Now, when we talk about education, there are certain philosophies of education. It is the philosophy or the philosophers of education who have tried to frame certain aims of education. Now, when we talk about education, we know that there are two confronting theories. One is about individualism. When an individual is born, you know that the individual needs to be developed. That is the whole focus of education. Now, every person has certain innate abilities. For example, consider any tree, mango tree. Now, it is at the mango seed, it is able to grow. Now, it has inner potentiality or inner hereditary matter to grow into a mango tree. But you consider a jasmine tree. Now, it is able to develop into a jasmine plant and able to give flowers. Now, their innate abilities are different. Likewise, the individuals also have different innate abilities, and it is by their free activities or developing the individual characteristics of which they are born with, the educational practice should be able to develop such innate abilities or the abilities with which a person is born. Now, this leads to the individualism theory or individualistic aspect of education. Now, Bertrand Russell, he says that everybody is first an individual and then something else. Therefore, the essentiality of individualism is, if individual is not properly developed, then there's a possibility that the society won't be developed. So none can achieve distinction, nor they can feel happy, nor can they develop their abilities to the complete extent unless they are given a chance to develop their individualities. Now, we talk about self-realization, and also we talk about developing the needs, interests, and abilities of a child. Now, they're all dependent on their own inner abilities, which are again dependent on the hereditary factors. Now, according to the naturalistic philosophy, a child should be developed on his own. A child should have the complete freedom to do his own thinking. The child should be allowed to develop according to his own instincts. Therefore, the child should be given such opportunities which would help him to develop such innate abilities. Now, the problem is, we talk about the different behavior, but at the same time, generally when an individual tries to grow, it is not that he grows in isolation. There are societal forms of oppression or societal forms of discipline or control. Sometimes they work well with some children, that is disciplining, but sometimes they do not. This is because the social forms of behavior can lead to either tension, stress, or mental conflict in the child, because he wants to act according to his innate abilities, but at the same time he faces the social controls. Therefore, if they are able to adjust, they develop into better individuals. But sometimes the problem is they may also develop into maladjusted individuals, because on one hand, they have their own innate individualism, which they cannot fight against. On the other hand, there are socially imposed controls which go against the nature of the individualism. Also, when we talk about the individual aspect, we know that individualism, or trying to express oneself or trying to live according to one's innate abilities, is based on biological principles. We cannot go against the biological principles, because every individual is a distinct entity. And he has to experiment in his own life and has to develop his unique individuality by natural means and in a clear manner. But sometimes if he's oppressed, sometimes it may lead to a maladjusted personality. We have several examples in history where repression can lead to maladjusted personalities. Also, it is natural and is a progressive thing to think that individuals should be allowed to develop, because an autonomous development continuously, if they're able to develop, a person is able to develop on their own, it would be good and naturally lead to the development of society at a later phase, because good individuals contribute to good society. Also, democratic values talk about development of good citizens. And who are good citizens? People who are able to think on their own, are healthy mentally and physically, and are able to exercise their unique abilities of their brain. But the problem with individualism theory or individualistic view of philosophy is this. The problem is when an individual tries to do or excel in his own way, sometimes they may be unrestricted in their views, or they in their what we call quest for full freedom, they may be exercising somewhat unwanted liberty or freedom, which may lead to problems to other individuals. So this leads to social disintegration, because people behave in whatever they want according to their own will, and therefore they may not give importance much to social rules. Now, is it really applicable in real life? That is another aspect one has to think about, because if one were to act, it is not really that in society one can act according to their own will or interests or their own tendencies. There are other factors actually which try to go them down, either economic factors or social factors. Therefore, the aims and construction of curriculum should be every individual cannot be developed on their own. And every individual, if you try to develop a curriculum for each individual person, it would become very difficult. This would also not applicable in real life exactly. It's also impracticable. You can't have different types of teaching or different type of curricula to develop different types of individuals according to their own potentialities. That means internally, there are certain inconsistencies when we talk about individualism. That is, an individual, how he grows may be different. His innate abilities development will be different from that of the other person's or other child's innate abilities development. Further, the individualism aspect is, we talk about the individual, and therefore sometimes this individual may lead to self-conceitedness. That is, they may believe in their own goodness or their own worthiness, and they don't accept the others. This is not true. We know that every individual is unique, but your freedom stops at your nose. So therefore, what we find is the individualism aspect can lead to unhealthy attitude sometimes. The behavior also may not be moral. So here the society will have consequences of having individualism. That is why society tries to restrict the individualism, because individuality is, an individual is not existing in a vacuum. An individual exists in a societal stratum. Therefore, when we talk about much of individuality, if it has negative consequences on society, the society wants to curtail such activities, and therefore it has its own sort of controls where it tries to control the individual. Therefore, we find this conflict between the individualistic theories and social theories in education. Also, sometimes what happens, sometimes when we give maximum freedom to the child or the individual, now this will result in disregard of social obligations. So they think that individual interests are more important than the social concerns, and therefore they will not be able to pay back to the society. But an individual has to also help to contribute to the welfare of the society is one of his fundamental duties. Sometimes the ethical values in their quest or their pursuit of the what you call the individualism, the individual is not able to consider the others' interests or others what we call he does not care for their love, sympathy, or he doesn't sacrifice, he doesn't serve or cooperate with other people. Now, this means that he is not developing the social ability or the social goodwill, and this will result, the individual has certain negative aspects. Also, sometimes we find that they are not able to reason or argue, they're not able, they cannot be convinced by argumentation because they have become very adamant in their views. So individual makes the people take arbitrary decisions, and also sometimes they take reckless actions without understanding the effect of their actions on others. So these are some of the aspects of individualism. It is true that individualism should be developed so that the individual is happy, he is able to interact with others. But at the same time, it is also possible that individualism can have lots of negative consequences in the sense that it can lead to social disintegration, and the extreme sort of individualism can lead to what we call neglect of social obligations and ethical values. Now, opposite to the individualistic theory is the social theory of education. In the social theory of education, we talk about how the state aims or state views should be given consideration, and how state, which is a better prospect, should be respected and valued. We know that the social aim of education is to think that the society is the prime thing for which all the individuals should develop. We know that individuals may exist and they may die after some time, but the society or the state or the nation will continue. And therefore, they talk about the social aims of education, where strict adherence to the social norms, or trying to live for a country, or trying to understand the things where what we call the societal efficiency is more important, these are considered. Now, right from the days of the Greece, or the early days of Greece, where we had Greek civilization, then there were countries like Sparta, where education was found to be under the control of the state. And that is for the state. So they would ask the what we call the individuals to develop their warfare skills and help for the state and think for the state and fight for the state. And we know in the recent days that in Germany too, the Nazi regime has also been trying to see they took over the control of the education. Similarly, we find that the social aim of education is not to bring the individualism, but bring about the social efficiency. Now, such social efficiency, if it is good, if it is efficient, then it is called as that social aim of education has been achieved. Now, we know that the socialization is a process through which an individual gets acclimatized to the society. And how does an individual develop the social processes of development? This is because an individual originally tries to get, when a child is born, he gets affiliation to his family. And then he gets affiliation within his immediate neighborhood, and then with the school, and then with the larger clients of the society. Now here, this is a process of learning, trying to adjust to others, and this is known as socialization. Now, this is because every person has got his own social and psychological needs. For example, if you have got a gold medal or anything, would you be happy to have it for yourself? No, you would like to get the appreciation of others. Therefore, you would show it to others. So people have both social and psychological needs, and the social aim of education is people generally tend to get socialized, and there is a general, besides individual development, the social needs also should get satisfied, because individuals do not live alone, they do not live by themselves, but they live in the society. Now, what is the social aim? Social aim is the individual should be subjected to discipline. Here, sometimes their own individual self-worth or their own identity or individualism has to be contained, or it should be somewhat lessened for the better purpose of social development or democratic socialism. Sometimes some states feel that the individual rights may not be curbed, but they may be limited. That is, they may be controlled to a certain extent so that the social needs are also fulfilled. So we also talk about education for social service. We have many things where we talk about the students working for the community and also teaching. We teach citizenship in schools and we talk about rights and duties, and all these are in the support of the social aim of education. Now, society is given more value than that of the importance of the individual. And every individual, we have certain instincts. Sometimes they may be animalistic in nature, sometimes they may not be controlled, because all individuals are not born in the same way. So therefore, it is a social environment that should protect the others in the society, and therefore education should also emphasize social welfare, and that all the individuals should live in peace. And therefore, all the culture and civilizations that are being developed are because of the social development or having peace in the society. Now, society, peace, justice, all these, how they are obtained? By seeing that the education serves the purpose of the social aim, that is, everybody is given a chance to develop, not at one person's cost, and if necessary, the individual rules or the individual liberation or individual freedom may be curtailed to a certain extent. That's why in schools too, we say, the teachers try to control the students, because this excess individualism may not be harmful to the others. So within society, we require peace and justice. And we know, in spite of what we say, that having an individual, an isolated individual cannot live. There are all individuals always live in society. So if one lives in society which is well organized and is stable, that means that societal rules should be followed. Now, in order to live in the society, we should live in groups so that we can live in a happy life. And this would mean making certain compromises. Now, this is what the sociological theory of education talks about. We talk about getting the social aims achieved, and for getting the social aims achieved, we should have certain rules in education where the individual is molded so that he is able to live according to the rules in society, so that he can also live in peace and with security and able to exist with others, and everybody is happy. But the problem is, some people say, as for any theory, that the social aims of education are unpsychological, because sometimes they can have a negative impact on the development of the individual. Sometimes individual is curtailed for social benefit. That is, the individual is crushed, and education sometimes suppresses the individuality. That's why in the schools we find that a very creative child who is in his initial stages shows much potential. Because of the rigors of the education system, his individuality may be curtailed. So also sometimes the individual freedom and the social aims of development do not help for the development of aesthetic values. Now, how are the aesthetic values developed? The aesthetic values are developed through art and literature. But generally in the what we call the race for getting the social aim of education satisfied, or in our pursuit of knowledge, we try to neglect the aesthetic part, that is art and culture, with which the individual feels liberated or happy. Now, the individual's intellectual and moral development is also stunted, because we say that the character development or emotional development is at the mercy of the society rather than an individual. And also sometimes this may go to extreme level. For example, in certain countries, they develop such patriotic or other feelings in the child that they feel my country is great and I'm a great person. So this may lead to certain sort of national jingoism. My country is, whatever it does, it is correct, either right or wrong. This sort of narrow-mindedness may help, may hamper actually, stop the individual to have a universal sort of feeling or the basis of humanity, with which and blunts his thinking and also develops unscientific thinking in them. Now, when we consider the aims of education, we have talked about the general aims of education, that is the development of the innate abilities. And we talked about the individualistic theory, where an individual should be developed his innate potential. And we talked about the social philosophy of education, where the societal aspects also should be considered. Actually, we are talking about education, but education is supposed to have certain aims, because without any purpose, without which an individual can be developed, it may be meaningless. Any effort should have an aim. Unless you aim for something, you have some intention, It is a possibility that such things may not be realized. So therefore, the Encyclopedia of Modern Education talks about education being purposeful and ethical activity. That is, without aims, there is no education. Now, aims means having the foresight to see what your activities or practices will ultimately bring to you. Now, there is an educational philosopher called as Dewey. He says he doesn't much like the aims of education because he feels they are somewhat constraining. They don't help, they are not very liberating. But at the same time, he also finally gave certain aims of education. He says the intrinsic needs, because every child needs to be developed, the intrinsic needs should be developed. Every person has a need or activate. That is, he wants something to be activated. Now, this should be developed, and that should be the aim of education. The individual needs should be met. Second, he says that the activities that are there in the education must be given in such a kind of environment. That is, the environment is such a thing which should help the individual to be liberated and also to organize one's own capacities. That is, one, the child should have, the education should develop the intricate or the innate abilities of the child. Second, the environment should develop such innate abilities of the child. That is, the school environment should be worthy of it. And the third, he says, is generally don't have some sort of general or ultimate aims, because everything cannot be generalized. They need to be adjusted to the classroom. So ultimately, they tend to be specific. Therefore, we must try to say that all the small activities, whatever we do in education in a classroom, ultimately we may have a purpose beyond the classroom. So there are specific aims of education, the general aims of education, and these specific aims of education are tied to the general education. Now, why do we require the philosophy education, or why do we require aims for education? This is because unless you have an aim, you won't be trying to achieve anything. We require, for example, to direct our efforts and to use our energy properly and to see that our time is managed well, we have to have a sort of planning, and it would mean that an aim of education is necessary. Also, sometimes when we teach something and when we do something, we would like to evaluate, find out how much we have failed, how much good it has done to us, or how much good it is to the system or to the child, how much better he is because he has passed through the phases of education. And that would mean evaluation, evaluating the system or the curriculum or the education or the child. This would mean that we should have an aim of education. This is what we try to achieve through education. Unless we have such clearly spelled out aims or statements, we will not be able to evaluate ourselves. Also, sometimes every country has certain conditions, existing conditions. For example, if you consider our schools in India, we have contents of education, we have curricula, different methods of teaching, and also different types of teachers with different levels of abilities, and also different equipment, different laboratories. Some do not have any laboratories, and some have some have libraries, and sometimes how they plan the curricular activities or extracurricular activities, all these will have a bearing on the school efficiency. Similarly, to know how good we are, how bad we are, how better we can be. Now, to understand this system, we should have an aim. Unless we have the aim, we will not be able to adjust the managemental system or organizing system to that of the what we plan or want to do. So an aim will make us do ourselves to contribute creatively. Also, to provide efficient school administrative system, because it is not only the teachers, how well we plan things, how properly we organize our activities, how we administer our school, what equipment we give, how we organize, all these are dependent on the organization. So to actually direct ourselves, to evaluate our activities, and to evaluate the existing conditions in a particular society or in the educational system, to understand and to develop the better school administration, we do require aims. Now, there are several factors which are affecting the aims of education. One is, what sort of philosophy are we trying to develop? We were talking earlier about education for individual development or self-realization, and also talking about the societal aims of education. But also beyond that, there are certain philosophies. For example, we have the idealistic philosophy. That means Idealism means where the individual should reach his full potential and the education should help in the individual self-realization. But then there are other sort of philosophies in education, for example, pragmatism, where we say idealism doesn't work out. It is the realistic aspect, trying to understand how the society is as such right now, that helps the individual to know. Because trying to understand from an idealistic viewpoint may not help the individual to solve his day-to-day problems. Therefore, a pragmatical view will help. So depending on the philosophies, either pragmatism, realism, naturalism, or idealism, the type of schools also will vary. That is why we find a number of different type of schools. Also, there are other factors associated, determining the educational aims besides the philosophy, the psychology of the students. Depending on the nature of the students, the needs of the students, and the requirements, and the interests of the learners, the teaching should vary. So the aims of the education also are dependent on the activities or on the mental condition of the student. So some people, some children may be disabled. You can't adopt the same sort of education to them. So the psychological aspects of the students need to be considered before you go for the determining the educational aims. In spite of the various things we find that the equality, the cooperation and socialistic ideals, we find that in a country that all people do not have access to education. So our ideals may be something different. Our aims of education may be high, but at the same time, we find that the social realities are different and there are also economic problems and all children are not able to have the same access to education or to technology. Therefore, although we aim for higher education, it is the social realities or the economic realities that sometimes they try to actually model or they try to see the way in which a child develops. Also, we have the political ideologies. We know that the political nature of a country, for example, some may be democratic, some may be fascistic, some may be communistic, some may be totalitarian or authoritative sort of regimes they may be having. Now, depending on the type of the government one has, the type of the educational system in a country also varies. Sometimes it is the development of knowledge, how fast a country tries to keep in tune with the developments in knowledge, how it is developing in science and technology. All this will have a bearing on the aims of education as well as their curriculum, because it is the aims of education that are reflected in the syllabus or a curriculum of a school. Now, also we have the cultural factors and religious factors also impacting the aims of education. And likewise, they also, because the aims of education are different in such cases, we find different types of syllabi, different types of what we call curricular transaction, etc. So generally, we can say that our present century is a century of compromises. We do talk about individualism, but also we talk about social aspects also, because an individual cannot exist in social vacuum. Therefore, the individual aims, the social aims, and there are also educational aims for developing an individual. And all these aims, that is social aims, individual development of individual, as well as development of a country, as well as educational aims as such, which are all intermingled. And therefore, if you see any school or any curriculum, it is all these factors which are making up this particular aims of education. Now, all the aims of education are related to one of these. Now, coming to the scope of psychology or the scope of education and the problems of schooling in India, we know that the education is a process which goes on throughout the life, and education is preparation for living, as Herbert Spencer says. And we talk about the all-round development as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi talks about. We know that the education is a lifelong process, it is a dynamic process, and it should give scope for individual development, and it helps in the modification of behavior, and it is a process where there is social adjustment taking place. That is, a child increasingly gets adjusted to environment as well as tries to adjust himself socially to other beings. And we know that it is also a bipolar process. Education is a bipolar process in the sense there is a teacher and there is a learner, that is a teacher and a taught, and it is the interaction between these two that is determining the education. Also, sometimes it is known as the tripolar process because it is not only the teacher and the taught, and it's also environment. The environment with which a child is provided the facilities, and with which he is provided the technology, with which he is provided access to several educational experiences, that also determines the child's development. We also talk about education being both formal and non-formal. That is what is taught in school and what is also taught outside the school. That is maybe in the playground, maybe in a museum, maybe in a library. So all that is known as non-formal learning. In addition to above all of these, we talk about enhancement of experiences and also what we call trying to develop the individual in the modern aspects, that is seeing that the social change is also brought about with this education. We talk about social change is brought about by changing the individuals. Now, this is what is the nature of education. But then we know that nature of education means it is both an art as well as science. If somebody were to ask, if you are to teach to your children, is it an art and science? That is education. That is teaching children how to learn. Is it an art or science? It is art in the sense that one has to be creative and there are new ways of developing in the children. And it is science in the sense it has to be precise, it has to be researched upon, it needs to be organized. Now, considering the scope of education, what is the scope? The limitations with which in the educational field lies. We talk about educational philosophy. That is, the philosophy of a country or a society tries to develop what sort of education one has. We talk about educational sociology. That is, education and society have such an interaction depending on the societal needs or the societal views, the education develops. That is educational sociology. We talk about the educational psychology. That is, there is also an effect of psychology on education. That is depending on what the children's abilities are, how the teacher tries to develop the child, and how teacher develops the skills or knowledge in a child, what processes of development it uses, what theories of psychological principles it uses, the teacher uses while developing the child. All these fall under the educational psychology ambit. Also, we have got educational technology, what techniques you use in the classroom, what sort of audiovisual equipment one uses, the teacher uses, all these also have a role. So how a teacher presents a lesson, what he does, what sort of visual images he shows, what sort of audio cues he gives, different sorts of experiments can be given in the classroom, and all these technologies or on the subject matter can help actually to help the student learn better by experiencing these visual or audio-visual cues. Now, educational administration can also be a liberating force. For example, how the process of success of education depends on the efficiency of administration, how quickly the administration is able to organize, supervise, and also control schools, give information, all this is also necessary. The ability to measure and evaluate. The thing is, one should measure what only one teaches. So when we are able to measure, how a children has learned, able to rank him properly, gives happiness to the child and brings him a feeling of success. And therefore, measurement and evaluation is also important. That is how he is measured, how he is given exams, how he is evaluated, and how his results are shown to him, and how he is given the feedback. All these have a role in the scope of education. All these fall under the educational aspect. Also, we talk about the comparative education. Today, we know that education is different in the sense that there are different education for the disabled people, and for people who learn in non-formal education, there's distance education. And also we talk about comparative education and special education. These are all different types of education based on the needs of the learners. Sometimes we talk about the history of education in a country, how it has developed over several ages, and how different periods have a different impact on the education, and what were the features or factors that were trying to develop particular sort of education in a country. Now, also we have other fields of education connected to this, like literary education, health education, professional and technical education, vocational education, and all these. Now, we know that education is interdisciplinary. It is a social science as well as an applied science. We talk about the credibility, responsibility, and self-reflexivity of education. So instead of trying to understand education as an independent one, we should try to see that it is a system dependent on different disciplines, And also, all these aspects of education are gradually being ramified, they're being developed because we know there has been knowledge explosion and specializations, and new branches of education are also developing, that is education for parents, education in digital age, and also secular education, moral education, social media and education, all these sort of new terminology in education which have had new impact and which are trying to create new sort of what we call information with regard to field of education are being developed. Now, the problems of education in contemporary India are, the thing is, we have known that there is no uniformity in education across the states. Each state has its own sort of education, and each state has its own distinct identity. For example, if one tries to see the state of Gujarat or Maharashtra may be having a different system of education compared to the state of Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. So if you go and view, the universities present, the state schools present, they all are different. Of course, they do abide by some boards of education like CBSE, ICSE, etc. But in spite of that, we find that the way that the education is taught is different in each. And we also know that there is a lack of quality of education, in the sense that, say, for example, they have actually tried to find how many Indian universities can rank in the Times Higher Education World Reputation Rankings, and out of the 100 universities, none could be found from India. Also, we find that there is disparity in the sense that the education is more in certain states rather than in other states. So, for example, out of the 100 best institutions in India, 67 are from just 8 states. So this shows about the disparity in education across the country. Also, we find that education is felt as something that can be, that need not be pursued, it can be bought. So a sort of corruption has brought in the fake degrees, fake things, and also education, because the people do not, if some people do not give proper importance to it, it has led to corruption in education. We also find that there is no proper value education, because education without values, it may lead to what we call disjointed individuals, and also it does not have better consequences for society. Somehow we try to separate the values of education from education when we think just getting good marks is enough, without trying to develop a proper individual who has moral leanings. Okay, and also we find that the women's education has suffered much. This is because of the social aspects. In our country, there are economical reasons. Therefore, the children would, the women child would try, the girl child would be married off earlier. And also there are social reasons, social sort of curbings, and therefore women education has suffered greatly across the years. And even now, in spite of all the efforts we are putting in, we find that the problem still exists, and because the minimum age is 18, and you know that recently the government tried to improve it to 21, so that the girl or women can also try to achieve independence, and also the social constraints could be somewhat curtailed or stopped. Also, we find that the curriculum across the country is not the same. In all the different state governments, we find different syllabus. Syllabus and curriculum are not same. Curriculum is the whole set of activities that a school takes up. Syllabus is just the content that is taught in the schools. Now, the syllabus is dependent on the curriculum, and we find that the syllabus revision is not done much quite often, and therefore the societal developments or social developments in science and technology are varying, but at the same time they are not being reflected in the syllabus and in the curriculum. And we find that the curriculum is not up to date, the books are not up to date, and also we find that the requirement of industries or the requirement of the companies are different, but at the same time the individuals are lagging behind with their old skills or the skills which are not updated. We also find that in our country mostly that absenteeism is seen in public force. That is, people do not value their work and they are absent to their work. And also in the teaching community, we find that most of the teachers are absent. One random survey has shown that one day 14.6% of teachers in Maharashtra and 41.9% teachers in Jharkhand have been absent. So absenteeism in public, in school workforce also has had a negative effect on the children. Also, the wrong societal outlook. For example, today also we consider getting good marks as an indicative of education. Of course, one gets good marks, it means one has mastered a subject, but that is not the whole criteria. For example, learning English or learning something is also thought to be the measure of intellect. Of course, learning a language is good enough, and learning several languages is still good, but at the same time, that does not mean learning a vernacular language or being good at a vernacular language is also a measure of one's intellect. So intellect cannot be measured in the terms of a language, nor can scoring be thought as one of the best ways of getting something done. Also, besides scoring, you also require logical thinking, ability to solve a problem, getting adjusted with others, taking others along with you, that is team spirit or team play. At the same time, you're also supposed to develop certain moral and ethical values. So mere scoring means it will lead to copying another sort of negative sort of traits in the children. Also, this has led to rote learning or learning by heart. And by learning by heart, it means one has not developed the ability to understand the thing or to present in his own way, or also try to see that the concept is properly understood. So rote learning will lead for pressure on marks, and this has led to pressure from parents to get more marks. It has led to unhealthy attitudes and also tension to some children. Also, there is some discriminatory type of selection of subjects, because the parents, it is not the child's ability rather than the parental influence that has led the children to select certain subjects, which has led to what we call certain sort of pressure and tension, and this also had a negative impact. For example, languages, communications, or arts are looked down, whereas science and technology are somewhat looked upon. So also we find that in the schools or in colleges, because of the number of students that are present, individual attention is not shown. Furthermore, based on all this, in our what we call tendency to trying to complete the syllabus or curriculum, much focus has not been given on value education or trying to develop the individual as a societal being, as a person with integrity, honesty, trying to get along with the society. This sort of time was not given to develop such abilities in a child and make him into a complete individual. Now, what are the different solutions one can give to this? We should try to give more importance to primary and secondary education, and also see that we adopt new technology to education, and we should develop the innovation and creativity in children, but that would mean spending more time with them and trying to develop group activities in them. And also we should try to personalize education, that is try to make the individual feel happy, that his individual is addressed, and train the trainers, the teachers should also be trained. And we should change the aptitude to teach. That is, unless a teacher has an aptitude, he should not get into the teaching field. Otherwise, he may not have the correct idea of how to develop the children. Also, the governments or the schools should be able to deal with corruption strictly. Education should be made affordable. That is what the government is trying to do with several actions that is trying to. We have got several schools like Kasturiba schools and others where education is being accessible to all. We also should have a nationalistic educational sector. That is, the educational testing also should be done on national basis, and education should be free of cost. And we should also try to introduce technology to education. So we have in this chapter tried to see the general problems of education and how education aims should be actually captured in the actual principles of education. See that what are the different, what is the nature of education as such, and what is the scope of education. Nature is something different in the sense, what is the ultimate thing we see in education. The scope is with which, what are the different subjects with which a subject has to deal, so that what are the different aspects it covers. And also we have tried to see the nature of education and how it can be used for developing the children, and what are the general problems of education that the children face in schools, and how these problems could be overcome by governments or by teachers by taking certain steps. With this, I'll stop my lesson here. Thank you all.